Hi, my name's Coulson, and I wish I could tell you this was just one of those awkward family dinners. But it wasn't. At my wife's family's anniversary party, they laughed at my parents, called them sweet old folks who must depend on me to survive. They didn't know those poor old folks owned a mansion 10 times bigger than this ballroom and had just signed a deal worth nearly $1 billion. And my wife, she saw it all and smirked. She let them mock the only people who ever loved me without conditions. What happened when I showed them the truth, the panic, the silence? You'll want to hear this, because when I walked out with my parents that night, I didn't just leave the party. I left everything. Or maybe I finally found what was worth keeping. Let me tell you how it all went down. The drive down Collins Avenue was quiet. The kind of quiet where no one's upset, but everyone's holding something back. I kept my eyes on the road, stealing glances in the rearview mirror. Dad sat behind me, his old navy jacket buttoned to the top like he was heading to church. Mom was next to him, gently smoothing out the creases in her cream blouse for the 5th or 6th time. Her fingers trembled slightly, like they always did before stepping into a room full of people with expensive smiles. "It's just a party, Mom," I said, "not an interview." She smiled but didn't say much. That was her way. Dad gave a little chuckle. "She knows that, son. She just wants to look presentable. These folks, well, they might not be like us." That was the thing. They weren't. The Voss family didn't pretend to be humble. They wore wealth like a birthright, not something earned. Ariel, my wife, had grown up with that. Country clubs, gala events, curated photos on holiday cards. My folks, they had none of that. Just long days, honest work, and a quiet fortune they never bragged about. When we pulled into the valet line outside the Ocean Royal Hotel, I caught the briefest glance from a man in a tuxedo. Not a smirk, not a smile, just a pause, like he clocked us immediately as outsiders. I helped my mom out of the car, my dad following close behind. They looked like they didn't belong. But to me, they looked like home. Inside the hotel lobby, the scent of citrus candles mixed with polished marble and ego. It was already crowded. The Voss clan didn't do small events. Everyone was in some shade of black or gold. Women in shimmering gowns, men in suits tailored like they were poured onto their bodies. And then I saw her. Ariel came walking across the marble tiles like she was floating, a soft pink cocktail dress hugging her frame. Her smile found me first, then faded slightly when her gaze moved past me to my parents. "Coulson," she said, kissing my cheek lightly. "Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Pendry." Her voice was polite, even rehearsed, but no warmth. That little spark I was hoping for? Absent. "We're so glad to be here," Mom said quickly, trying too hard. Ariel nodded and glanced behind her like she was waiting for a reason to step away. Before I could say more, a couple of her cousins walked up. The tall one with the thin smile, Bennett, and the woman who always looked like she was appraising your shoes. Bennett slapped me on the back. "Man, it's good to see you. And these must be your folks." He leaned forward and grinned wide at Dad. "Bet you're proud of your son. He's probably helping you out a bunch now, huh? What's rent like in Nashville these days?" Twist S1 hit right then. I laughed, but it sounded hollow. Dad gave a softer one, always the peacemaker. "Oh, we manage fine," he said. "Our little place suits us." What he didn't say was that little place had 12 bathrooms and its own stretch of private beach. But he wouldn't. That wasn't him. I turned to Ariel, hoping, just hoping, she'd say something, even just, "Actually, they're doing all right." Instead, she adjusted her bracelet, glanced around, and said nothing. It landed deeper than I expected. Not the insult. I'd grown up learning to let that stuff slide. But the silence from her. That was new. We made our way into the ballroom. It was the kind of room that made you walk slower. Crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed everything. White-gloved servers gliding across the floor with trays of champagne. At the far end, a string quartet played something so delicate it barely touched the air. My parents stood quietly beside me, their eyes wandering politely, unsure if they were allowed to admire anything. I saw the looks, small, fast, cutting glances from people sizing them up like a used coat in a high-end store. My chest tightened. I used to think I could buffer them from this, that marrying Ariel meant I could walk between both worlds, the world of real grit and the one of practiced elegance. But I was wrong. And I remembered something my dad once told me when I was 12, after a church meeting where a deacon mistook him for a janitor. Son, some rooms will never respect you. Respect yourself anyway. That memory came back like a tide pulling at my ankles, the clinking of glasses and murmurs wrapped around me. But all I could hear was the quiet churn in my stomach. Tonight wasn't about love or celebration. It was about judgment. And I knew, even before we sat down, that this night would split something open that wouldn't be easy to mend. As we made our way toward the seating area, that strange heaviness in my chest grew. It wasn't panic, not yet. But it felt like the kind of pressure you get before a storm hits. The usher walked ahead of us, his arms slightly extended as if we might get lost in the maze of tables. I glanced around, expecting to see a neatly printed sign that read, Pendry, Family, somewhere near the stage, close to Ariel's parents. But the cards lined across the white-draped tables said otherwise. Pendry, Pendry, I whispered under my breath, scanning. The usher finally stopped at a small table pressed up near the edge of the room. So close to the service entrance, I could see a waiter slipping through the swinging doors with a tray of empty glasses. The table was smaller than the rest, missing the centerpiece all the others had. But what hit me hardest were the two chairs. On the backs of both were peeling stickers. One said, Staff 12. The other just read Staff. My breath caught. I stared. The labels were half torn, clearly forgotten. Or maybe not. Dad looked at it, then turned to me with that same soft grin he used whenever he fixed a broken fence with duct tape. Looks like we're working the late shift, son, he joked, tugging at the sticker with one calloused hand. I couldn't speak. I looked at Ariel. She had stopped a few steps behind, fiddling with the strap of her dress. I waited for her to say something, to raise a brow, to correct the mistake, anything. But she leaned in just slightly and whispered, It's probably just a mix-up. Let's not make a thing out of it tonight. Then she smirked. It was faint, but it was there. That hit harder than the staff stickers. It wasn't confusion. It was a kind of permission, like she saw it coming and chose not to stop it. I felt heat rising to my ears. My dad had already taken his seat, casually rubbing at the residue from the sticker like it didn't mean a thing. My mom hovered behind her chair, still standing, waiting to see what I'd do. I could see the shift in her posture. Shoulders slightly hunched, hands clasped in front like she was bracing for impact. A waiter walked by just then, paused, and nodded at my parents. Hey, you guys working the back tonight? He asked, polite, friendly, like he was being helpful. Before I could say anything, Mom nodded. Oh no, we're guests, she said gently, then sat down quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. But thank you. She smiled too, like it was all fine. I couldn't move. My hands were in fists, and I didn't even notice until my knuckles started to ache. From across the room, I saw two of Ariel's cousins, the same ones from earlier, watching. One elbowed the other and leaned in to whisper something. They laughed, heads tilted, like this was some inside joke I was just starting to catch on to. I looked back at the table. Dad was fixing his napkin on his lap. Mom was folding her hands again, eyes on the centerpiece-less table. Part of me wanted to stand up, raise my voice, ask which Voss genius decided to place my parents next to the damn kitchen door like they were part of the waitstaff. I imagined myself dragging a chair to the center table, setting it right next to Ariel's mother, and daring someone to stop me. But the other part of me remembered. I remembered my parents' quiet strength, the way they never needed attention or recognition to feel worthy, the way they used to sit through community meetings where no one listened, but they'd still raise their hands to offer ideas, and how, when my brother died, they didn't cry at the funeral. They held everyone else up instead. I sat down next to my dad. "I'm sorry," I said under my breath. He squeezed my shoulder. "You have nothing to be sorry for," he said. "We're fine, Coulson. Let's just enjoy the evening." But I caught it. That flicker behind his smile. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. Not in me. In this. In how we were being seen. I swallowed hard. The music kept playing. The room glittered around us. People toasted champagne over speeches about love and legacy. But at our little table in the shadows, I felt like something inside me had just been cut loose. Then a voice behind us said something that made the room go silent for me. I turned my head, just slightly, toward the voice behind us. The words came with a syrupy tone, fake sweet, but sharp underneath. "Are they here to clear the dishes later? Thought they retired from janitorial work." It was Taryn, Ariel's cousin, loud enough for everyone within 6 feet to hear, loud enough for my parents to hear. He said it to another Voss relative, but his eyes flicked toward our table, then back to his champagne like it was nothing. I heard Mom's bracelet shift slightly as her hand trembled, her fingers curling inward on the tablecloth. Dad didn't flinch. He just pressed his lips together and stared forward at the centerpiece that wasn't even lit like the others. I pushed my chair back, almost standing up, but forced myself down again. My jaw felt tight, and my vision tunneled for a moment, focusing only on Taryn's back as he sauntered off, chuckling. I turned to Ariel. She was sitting there, right next to me, eyes on her phone, scrolling. She took a slow sip from her glass and said nothing. "You heard that, didn't you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. She didn't look at me. "Everybody jokes here," she said, tapping her screen. "It's fine. Don't be sensitive." I stared at her hands, the same hands that used to hold mine so tightly when my mom made dinner, and she'd say how she loved being part of a real family. That version of her didn't seem to exist anymore. Then she added, as if to justify the whole thing, "They think your parents depend on us. I can't control what they assume." I don't know what hurt worse, Taryn's insult or her choosing not to care. I took a breath, trying to ground myself, but I couldn't shake it. Couldn't shake the feeling that I'd led my parents into a place where they were never meant to be respected, where kindness wore tuxedos and cruelty came with appetizers. Mom touched my arm gently. "Sweetheart, don't ruin the evening over strangers' opinions," she said, always the one trying to keep things steady. Dad leaned toward me. "We've heard worse. Let them talk," he added, smiling like he was fine. But his eyes, they had that look, that quiet ache of a man who's seen people measure worth by wristwatches. I sat back, hands under the table, balling into fists again. I remembered growing up how people would assume Dad was just a handyman, how they'd talk slower to him like he wouldn't understand contracts or business plans. They never saw the man who could buy and sell half their office buildings. They never saw the mind behind the empire. Money buys comfort, not character. Never lead with it, he used to say. And tonight, that principle was being used as a weapon, a trap they walked right into. Then another voice came, this one from behind us, but to the left, near the bar. Bless his heart. He brought his parents even though they don't fit in here. Sweet of him. I didn't see who said it. I didn't need to. The tone was thick with pity, not warmth. As if I had done something noble by dragging two relics into a polished room where they didn't belong. I clenched my jaw until it ached. My hands stayed hidden beneath the table, pressed against my thighs. My breathing was shallow, controlled. I leaned toward Ariel. Can't you at least say something? I asked, my voice low, almost breaking. She looked at me and smiled, like this was all beneath her. My family's proud. They don't mean harm. You're overreacting. Then she reached over and patted my hand. A soft tap, mechanical, rehearsed. It wasn't comfort, it was condescension. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. I looked around the room, the gilded walls, the chandeliers, the string quartet playing something slow and expensive. Everyone was smiling, clinking glasses, posing for pictures. But I wasn't in the picture. My parents weren't in the picture. This night wasn't about celebration anymore. It was about humiliation. A long, slow performance where every slight was deliberate, where silence from the people who claimed to love you was louder than any insult. I started cataloging everything. Taryn's voice, the stickers on the chairs, Ariel's cold shrug, her refusal to even fake concern. Every moment stacking in my chest like bricks. Something in me was waking up. Not rage, not yet, but clarity. Then the host tapped the microphone, and the moment that followed pushed everything over the edge. The room fell quiet as Lisa tapped the microphone with a soft click-click. Her voice, practiced and clear, floated above the hushed chatter. "Good evening, everyone," she said with a broad smile. "Please make your way toward the front. We're about to begin the program." The lights dimmed slightly. Guests shuffled closer to the stage. Silverware clinked against half-finished cocktail glasses, and servers began easing out of the way, holding trays against their chests. I stood, gently nudging Dad's elbow. "Let's move up a bit so you two can see." Ariel was already 10 steps ahead, gliding toward the front row like she belonged there. She didn't glance back, not once. Just that posture, tall, polished, perfect posture in those designer heels, like none of this concerned her. As we reached the main seating area, the stage just a few feet away, I instinctively moved toward a row near the front. The Voss family tables had gold ribbons on the chairs, and I assumed we were meant to sit with Ariel. We were, after all, family. But then a hand blocked me. It was Gordon, one of Ariel's uncles. Broad-shouldered, red-faced from the wine, with that country club arrogance I remembered from our wedding. He stepped slightly in front of my parents and said, "Oh no, these are for family." I blinked. "They are family," I said slowly. "They're my parents." He gave a small scoff and leaned in, just enough to keep his tone patronizing but audible. "Your in-laws aren't Voss family. Let's not create a scene, all right?" Behind him, Ariel had already taken her seat beside her cousins. She glanced up briefly, saw us standing there, saw her uncle's outstretched hand, and looked away. She didn't say a word. My mother gave me a soft pat on the back. "It's okay, Coulson," she murmured, like she was the one comforting me. We stepped back. I let them guide themselves to an open row near the side wall, the kind of spot usually reserved for late arrivals or hotel staff on break. The hurt deepened when I noticed a faint chuckle from a teenager a few seats away. He leaned into his buddy and whispered, just loud enough for me to catch, "Poor things. They must feel so out of place." My jaw tensed. Dad gave that same polite smile he'd worn all evening, though his hands rubbed together slowly, the skin on his knuckles pale and tight. I sat beside him, heart pounding but controlled. Every word, every glance tonight had been a calculated cut. Never deep enough to bleed out loud, but always sharp enough to leave bruises. I turned to Ariel again, begging for something. "Say something," I whispered. "Please, just say something." She glanced sideways at me and replied coolly, "It's my family's event. Don't make this complicated. They're sensitive about appearances." There it was. That line. That excuse. That final, gut-level message. Their pride is more important than your parents' dignity. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words stuck like dry cotton in my throat. But something inside me settled. Not in peace, but in clarity. A silent acknowledgement that the woman sitting across from me, the one I shared a home and vows with, was never going to defend what mattered to me. Not my values, not my family. Not even tonight, when the line had so clearly been crossed. I could live with people mocking me. I'd grown up in a world where assumptions about race and wealth and status were thrown like darts at anyone who didn't wear the right tie. But seeing my parents, gentle, dignified, good-hearted people, endure this again and again with silence and grace, that was what broke me. Mom reached for my hand. She smiled, warmly, the way only she could. "Coulson, we're fine," she said, voice steady. "You being here is what matters." Dad leaned over. "Son, these people don't define you, or us." And in that moment, I believed him. But it didn't lessen the anger. It sharpened it. Back on stage, Lisa began speaking again. "And now, before dinner is served," she said, her voice ringing across the ballroom, "we want to take a moment to honor a few special guests who've helped our family grow over the years." The audience gave polite applause. But I felt it, a quiet dread settling in my stomach. Something about her tone, too rehearsed, too smooth. Then she smiled wide and added, "And to begin, I'd like to call a name that means a great deal to us." The air around me thickened. She's about to say something that will change everything. That thought barely had time to settle before Lisa's voice rang clear across the ballroom. "And now," she beamed, pausing dramatically, "we'd like to recognize one of our own. Someone whose unwavering support this year helped elevate the Voss family to new heights. Ariel Voss." Applause erupted like a sudden slap. I felt my jaw tighten before my mind could catch up. Ariel was already on her feet, smiling, no, beaming, as she made her way to the stage, her heels clicking confidently across the polished floor. Silas looked over at me with quiet confusion. Donna tilted her head, barely masking her disappointment. Lisa continued, her tone soaked in pride. "Thanks to Ariel's generosity, our family business was able to expand into new territory. She made personal sacrifices, took bold steps, and we're all better for it. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe, because I knew the truth. I was the one who funded that expansion, quietly, contract after contract, loan after loan, my signature on every dotted line, my hours, my credit, my risk. I never asked for thanks, but I sure as hell didn't expect this. And Ariel, she didn't correct it. Not a glance in my direction. Not a word. The applause swelled again, filling every inch of the ballroom. With each clap, I felt myself shrinking, folding inward, like I wasn't even real to them. Silas leaned in close. "It's not right, son," he murmured. Donna added softly, "You didn't deserve that." I nodded, but my throat locked. I couldn't trust my voice. Ariel took the mic from Lisa, her expression poised, her tone measured. "I've always supported my family," she said. "It's who I am." The room hummed with admiration. Cameras clicked, guests nodded, but she never looked at me, not once. And in that moment, something tore inside me, not loudly, not in anger, but deep and clean, like paper split at the fold. Then it got worse. A voice from a nearby table, one of Ariel's cousins, I thought, called out, "Maybe Ariel can help Coulson's parents too. They look like they could use it." Scattered chuckles. That brand of laughter people use when they're testing cruelty in public. Silas stiffened. Donna looked down. And then, she smiled. "Ariel." She didn't laugh, but she smirked. That same rehearsed smirk she'd used earlier, like it was all just part of the game. That crushed the last bit of air out of my lungs. I sat frozen, hearing the blood rush in my ears. My mind scrambled, replaying the sacrifices, the silence, the nights I'd worked late just to help her family stay afloat while mine never once asked for anything. I felt small, not like a man, but like a boy again. That same boy in middle school whose lunch was mocked because it smelled different. The boy who learned to laugh it off because his parents said, "Kindness lasts longer than pride." But I wasn't sure that was true anymore. I stared at my hands, fists, tightening under the linen-covered table, then loosened them, then clenched again. Did I do this to myself? I wondered. Did I invite this? Is this what happens when you put others ahead of your own family? Silas shifted beside me. Slowly, he stood. "We should get some air," he said under his breath. "This isn't our place." But Donna placed a hand on his wrist, gentle yet firm. "No, leaving now will only make Coulson look weak." She was right, and it broke me a little more. I didn't want them here anymore, but I didn't want them to leave either. My thoughts spiraled. Shame mixed with fury, humiliation tangled with guilt. A part of me whispered, "Just sit it out. Let it go. Endure it, like always. You can be the bigger man." Maybe I should. Maybe that was still the honorable thing. Pretend I didn't hear it. Keep the peace. Don't cause a scene. I almost did. I almost swallowed it all. Almost. And then, just when I was ready to stay quiet, I saw something that snapped me out of it. An older woman, Aunt Janice, I think, leaned slightly toward the guest beside her, eyes fixed on my parents. Her voice wasn't loud, but it wasn't subtle either. "Bless them," she whispered. "Poor things. They must depend on him for everything." The other woman replied, as if it were a compliment, "He's a good son for supporting them." I turned instinctively to check my father's face. Silas had heard. His eyes didn't flicker, his posture didn't shift, but the gentle smile he'd worn, always a fixture at gatherings, vanished. Donna noticed. She reached across the linen-draped table and found his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Her thumb trembled against his. I didn't remember ever seeing him look small. But right then, he did. Not because he was ashamed, but because someone else decided to measure his worth by his wardrobe and seating position instead of by the life he'd built or the son he raised. That's when I saw it. A teenage boy, barely out of high school, leaning back in his chair 2 tables away, his phone angled discreetly, snapping a photo of my parents. Their modest clothes, Silas's too well-worn sport coat, Donna's purse tucked neatly at her feet. He nudged his friend, whispered something. Both snickered. I glanced at Ariel. She saw it too. Her eyes flicked to the boys, then to me, and then she looked away. No reaction, no raised brow, no shake of the head, nothing. I stood up without thinking. The motion startled my parents. "Coulson?" Donna asked gently. "I'm not sitting through another minute of this," I said, my voice low. Silas touched my wrist. "Son, don't start a fight you can't finish." I looked him in the eye. "I'm not starting anything," I said. "I'm ending something." I stepped out from behind our table and walked across the room, my shoes making soft contact with the ballroom floor. The noise of silverware and light conversation thinned around me. Heads turned. Some of them smirked, sensing drama. Others simply watched, unsure. Ariel sat at a table near the front, her posture flawless, her glass of sparkling water held with perfectly rehearsed grace. I leaned in just enough for only her to hear. "You saw what they did," I said. "You saw the picture." "They're kids," she replied, her tone smooth, practiced. "Don't overreact." I blinked. "This isn't kids. This is your entire family." She didn't even flinch. "And if you cause a scene," she said, "that's on you." I stared at her for a moment that felt longer than it was. And that was it. That was the confirmation I hadn't wanted, but already knew deep down. She wasn't going to stand with me. I turned and looked out over the room. The laughter, the sneaky glances, the under-the-breath comments, none of it was accidental. I saw them all clearly now. Men with polished shoes and inherited confidence, women who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes, people who had decided, somewhere between appetizers and applause, that my parents were beneath them. And yet Silas sat with his back straight. Donna still smiled kindly at servers. They carried more dignity in that corner seat than any Voss carried in a lifetime. I walked back. No words, just movement. Sat down between them. Donna touched my shoulder, softly. Silas gave a slight nod. Nothing else needed to be said. Inside, though, everything had shifted. I wasn't here to keep peace anymore. I wasn't here to blend in, be polite, be patient. This wasn't about me being embarrassed. It was about the 2 people who'd spent their lives protecting me, and who now needed someone to protect them. Not another minute. Not another insult. Not another smirk. And the moment dessert was served, the Voss family made their biggest mistake of the night. Lisa stood again, her wine glass clinking lightly against the microphone. "Before we enjoy dessert," she said, eyes scanning the room, "we'd like to share a short slideshow to celebrate those who've helped our family grow and shine this past year." A polite round of applause followed. I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten before the first image even lit up the screen. Something told me this wouldn't be just another recap. The lights dimmed and the room turned to face the large projection screen positioned near the stage. My parents and I had a partial view from where we sat near the back. Not prime seating, but enough to see what came next. It started simply enough. Photos of ski lodges, golf tournaments, ribbon cuttings, black tie galas, the usual montage of Voss family triumphs. People clapped at each one. Some cheered. Ariel, seated among the front rows, smiled like she was watching a highlight reel of royalty. Then came the first blow. The screen lit up with a photo I knew well, a ribbon cutting for the new Voss Logistics Center, a project I had quietly financed, negotiated, and delivered ahead of schedule. I was there that day. I remembered standing beside Ariel, handing her the ceremonial scissors, but in the photo, I wasn't there. I'd been cropped out, completely, cleanly, as though I had never been a part of it. The caption read, Ariel Voss, expanding the legacy. I leaned back slowly. My chest burned with disbelief. They erased me, I said quietly. Donna's hand gripped my forearm tighter than before. Silas didn't speak. He just closed his eyes, not like someone giving up, but like someone who had been here before and was bracing for the familiar sting. The screen changed again. A photo of my parents appeared, Silas and Donna, standing behind a table of gently used jackets and shoes at a community event we'd attended last spring. I'd arranged the donations, and my parents had shown up early to help sort and distribute. But the caption read, Community volunteers who needed extra support. I heard it before I saw it, a ripple of light laughter, a few gasps, a few muttered, "Oh," followed by those short, sharp exhales people use when they pretend something isn't cruel. Silas paled. Donna blinked quickly, clearly willing her eyes to stay dry. I stood. They were donors, I said, voice steady but loud enough to carry, not recipients. The table nearest us froze. A woman looked away. A man awkwardly cleared his throat, but most of them just stared, like I was interrupting the entertainment. A Voss uncle from a few rows forward turned halfway in his chair and hissed, "Sit down, Coulson. Don't embarrass yourself." Another chimed in, not even pretending to whisper. If they didn't want to be mistaken for volunteers, they should dress for the event. A few chuckles followed. Not everyone laughed, but no one stopped it either. I looked to Ariel. She didn't move, didn't raise a hand, didn't meet my eyes. She just sat, spooning a bite of some flourless chocolate torte, chewing slowly like nothing was out of place. The silence from her was louder than anything the others had said, and that was it. I'd spent too many years softening the edges of their cruelty, trying to believe they didn't mean harm. I'd made excuses for them in rooms where my parents didn't belong, not because they were out of place, but because these people had never intended to make space for them in the first place. And I had let it happen. Not anymore. I turned to face the cluster of tables ahead, my voice quieter now, but firm. The kind of calm that comes after the storm has already begun. You have no idea who you're talking about, I said, and I paused. But you're about to find out. I hadn't planned to say it. It came out steady, quiet, but it landed like thunder. The room was still reeling when Lysa, still at the mic, forced a brittle smile and continued. And now, our final recognition of the night. Her voice was syrupy again, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just allowed the erasure of the only man who'd funded half their slideshow. Silas sat stiff beside me, his hand resting palm up on his knee, thumb twitching every few seconds, a tic I hadn't seen since my teenage years. Donna leaned slightly toward him, eyes set forward but unblinking, like bracing herself before a crash. Then it hit. On the screen behind Lisa, a photo blinked into view, clearly altered and poorly at that. It showed Silas in front of a makeshift donation stand, holding a worn cardboard box labeled donations. But the shadows were wrong, the proportions off. The original photo was from the local paper. He'd been handing that same box to a family in need, not holding it like he was the one receiving help. Beneath it, the caption read, "Our family does so much to help those less fortunate." A ripple of laughter floated from the middle tables, not loud, just enough. That half-hearted, polite laughter that cuts deeper than a full-throated cackle. Silas's expression didn't change, but I felt the collapse from where I sat. His chin dipped slightly. The light in his eyes dimmed. Donna's hand reached for his, gripped it, and I saw, for the first time, her fingers tremble. I stood up. No words, no drama, just movement. Focused, clean. I stepped around the table and walked straight down the aisle, each step landing like a drumbeat in my chest. A few guests shifted in their seats. A woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Oh no, he's going up there." One of Ariel's uncles, the same one who'd blocked my parents from sitting earlier, began to rise, clearly intending to intercept me. I didn't slow. I didn't blink. His courage collapsed by the time I passed his shoulder. I reached the edge of the stage, looked directly at Lisa, and said calmly, "Take that photo down, now." Her grip on the mic wavered, but she didn't move. The screen stayed lit. The photo stayed up. And silence rippled across the ballroom like a dropped glass. I turned to the crowd. "You mock them," I began, my voice controlled, every word measured. "Because you think they're less than you. Because you see plain clothes and think charity case. Because you see a seat by the wall and assume they belong in the shadows." Gasps rippled across the room. A few heads turned. A server froze mid-pour, wine sloshing in the glass. "But you don't know who they are," I continued. "You never bothered to ask. You only know how to measure status by what's stitched onto a dress, or how many zeros follow a last name." "Coulson, stop!" one of the aunts called out. "You're embarrassing, Ariel." "This is not the time," another added, clearly trying to salvage the night. "No," I said, turning back to face them. "This is exactly the time." I glanced toward the AV booth and raised my voice. "Pull up the folder labeled Estate Photos." The room didn't breathe. The AV operator hesitated. I could feel the tension crackle in the air. A single wrong move and the whole place might erupt. I held his gaze. Then, slowly, he clicked. The screen flickered, and then it began. First, aerial shots. Wide, crisp drone photos of a private beachfront estate, lit with warm light spilling from floor-to-ceiling windows. Then the pool, infinity edge, curved, lined with stone. The garden, the vineyard, the guest houses. Then, a close-up of the framed Forbes verification. Dated, signed, evaluated at $997 million, nearly $1 billion in asset valuation. Mouths fell open. Chairs stopped creaking. Even the air felt thick. A man at the third table dropped his fork onto his plate. Somewhere in the back, someone muttered, "What the?" I turned back to the guests. My voice lowered, like the quiet before a storm. "You mocked the wrong people." Ariel's face was frozen, not with shock, but with panic. For the first time tonight, she looked out of place. Silas didn't move. Donna reached up and wiped one corner of her eye. Not because she was sad, but because, finally, they saw her. And in that silence, thick, unmoving, nearly sacred, something shifted. Not in them, in me. No one applauded. No one dared. The ballroom was still, as if even the chandeliers had forgotten to shimmer. All those voices that had been loud and smug minutes ago, muted now. Their smirks? Gone. I could almost hear them recalibrating, trying to unwrite what they just saw. Then came the scramble. Lisa stepped forward again, Mike shaking slightly in her grip. Her tone was light, but her face was pale. This must be a misunderstanding, she said, eyes darting between me and the crowd. We were just having fun. Behind her, one of the uncles, the same one who'd hissed at me earlier, stumbled forward, loosening his collar. Coulson, listen, if we had known... He caught himself. Why didn't you say something earlier? It wasn't guilt I heard in his voice. It was fear. The kind of fear that comes when the mask slips and you realize the people you've mocked are not only watching, they've got power you didn't count on. And they're no longer quiet. I didn't answer him. There wasn't a point. Ariel approached next, more hesitant than before, her heels clicking too fast against the floor. Her voice dropped, fake softness coating each word like syrup. Coulson, baby, if you just told me, we could have avoided all this. I didn't know. I took one step back. You didn't need to know they were wealthy to treat them with respect. She blinked. No words came. Her lips parted, then shut again. Behind me, I felt my father's presence before I heard him. Son. His voice was warm, even, calm. Let's go home. He didn't say it loudly. He didn't need to. It landed like an anchor in the room, solid, unmoved by the tides of performance. I turned slightly, just enough to see him standing beside me. His hand touched my shoulder, not to guide me, but to stand with me. Donna followed a beat later, folding in beside him with quiet certainty. As we turned to leave, I caught movement to my right. Donna stopped and faced a table near the aisle, a cluster of Voss cousins and in-laws who had snickered earlier, who now sat still as portraits. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Kindness costs nothing, she said simply. We gave you a chance to show it. A few looked down at their plates. One woman reached for her water glass with trembling fingers. I took their hands, one in each of mine. My mother's was warm, my father's steady. Together, we walked the length of the ballroom. No one stopped us. No one dared. It wasn't triumph. Not really. It was release. A quiet, deliberate severing of ties that had held too tightly for too long. Every step toward the exit felt like removing a stone from my chest. Then, just as we reached the double doors, the heels came again. Coulson, Ariel called out. Please, wait. We paused in the hallway, under the dim sconces, just before the exit to the night. She hurried to catch up, her expression cracking at the edges. I can fix this. I didn't know they'd go that far. My family was just... I turned to face her fully. No, I said. They were exactly who they chose to be, and you chose them. Her breath caught. The color drained from her cheeks. She didn't follow us again. Outside, the air was cooler than I expected. Clean, honest. The night sky stretched overhead, soft and wide and full of possibility. Silas stood still beside me, looking toward the parking lot, but not in a rush. Donna linked her arm through his. I exhaled, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. For years, I'd been shrinking myself to fit into a family that had no room for anything real. I'd silenced myself so often, I almost forgot how it felt to speak. But not anymore. Not after tonight.